Hi everyone, Laurie Schmidlin here with my very first Make It Monday tutorial for Paper Tray ink. Today I'm going to talk about watercolor wash backgrounds. You don't have to be a watercolor artist to create beautiful watercolor backgrounds, and really you can use almost any inks, from watercolor paints and markers to ink refills. This makes this a very useful and fun technique for anyone. Let's get started. So I've got two cards I'm going to share with you. Both utilize the same watercolor wash technique for the backgrounds. This first one is a very localized area of color, leaving a lot of white space. This is a great technique when you have flowers or other small focal images that you really want to pop off the card. And the second one utilizes the emboss resist technique. So we have an embossed background that we use a watercolor wash on top of. We're actually going to start with this card right now. I have a piece of watercolor paper. This measures 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. This is the Tim Holtz Distress watercolor paper, but I think any watercolor paper would work for this as long as it's really thick. We're going to be laying a lot of water down on this paper, so the thicker it is, the less likely it's going to warp or bubble as much. And for this technique, I really like to use detail images. I think it's really fun with their really open images as well. So we're going to be using this large flower from the Fresh Bouquet stamp set. I really like the detail of it, but yet it's a little whimsical as well. I think it's going to look great. So I've got my stamp already prepared on my block, and I'm going to start by preparing my watercolor paper. So whenever you're embossing, you want to prepare your paper so you don't get those stray flecks of embossing powder. You know, when you go to heat it, you see these little dots everywhere. This really helps prevent that. I like these little pouches. These are great. You can also get them in brush form. They have a little brush tip on here. I just prefer the pouch. So now that I've got that, I'm going to ink up my stamp with Versamark ink. And this is white detail embossing powder. I really like the detail because it's a lot finer of a powder, and so it's not gonna lose that detail when you heat set it. Now I'm going to stamp each one and add the powder in between each stamping because it's really hard to see where you've stamped, so you don't want to overlap your stamping too much. So I'm going to just fill up this card and then heat set it. I have one all finished that I'm going to set this aside. One little tip about using your heat tool. Make sure you give it about 20 to 30 seconds to really warm up before you try heat setting your image, because sometimes it overcooks your embossing powder. And especially when you're using an emboss resist technique, the embossing powder will melt into your paper, so it's not as raised or as shiny, and so it kind of loses that effect that we're going for. So if you give it a good 20 seconds to warm up and then point it at and use your heat tool to heat set it, it works a lot better. So I have one here that I have embossed. I don't know if you can see that. It's just all over with that same image. I'm going to add it to a piece of particle board. You can find these in home improvement stores, art supply stores, even office supply. I think this came in a really large sheet, and I asked my husband to cut it down into smaller pieces for me. So it's maybe 1/8 of an inch thick. What this does is when you tape it down, your card down, it gives it something to hold on to. So when you add a lot of water to your project, the paper doesn't buckle or warp as much. And this is just blue painter's tape. This is going to make it so it doesn't tear the paper when you go to take the tape off. And because of the amount of water that we're going to be adding to our project, this is a really important step. Even if you don't have particle board, use some heavy duty cardboard or something that you can adhere that paper to. Now I'm only doing maybe 1/8 of an inch of a border around, and don't worry because we're going to trim this later on, so you're not even going to notice that. Now whenever I work with watercolors, I have 2 separate water containers. One I'm going to always keep clean and clear, and the other is what I'm going to use to clean my brush. So this first one, we're going to use, I like a large flat brush because we're going to apply clear water all over this paper. And you know, the larger the brush, the easier it is to get all over the paper. Any brush will do, any clean brush, because we're going to just be using clear water. And the paints that I'm going to be using today are the Kuretake. I do not know how to pronounce them, but I think they're fantastic. The Kuretake Gansai Tambi watercolors. As you can see, they're well loved, well used. I love these. They're just, I am no watercolor artist, but they are so easy to use. I really enjoy them. I'm going to start, and I always keep some paper towels handy. This is just so you can wipe your brush, or you can use an old towel or some other rag. We're going to just start by laying on the water. And you can see what I meant. We're going to add a lot of water to this. We're really going to soak this page. Now I'm going to take a smaller flat brush, and I'm going to dip it into my, and this is the one that I'm going to use to clean my brush. So I'm going to start with the red. I'm going to really soak it, get it nice and saturated. And I'm just swiping on the color. As you can see, it's really reactive with the water. It runs really nicely. Clean that off and add some orange. And to start, you can see the defined areas. I'm not blending them too much. I'll do that at the end. Otherwise, if you blend too much, it kind of starts to look a little muddy. So I'm going to add some yellow. I kind of like to mix them so it's a little bit of a warmer yellow. Now this is where I like to come back in here and maybe blend them a little bit so they're not such straight lines. And you can even come in here with just water, and it helps them blend a little bit more. And you'll notice that a lot of the water is pooling right here at the edge, and it is buckling even though we taped it down. And that's going to be okay because we're going to trim those edges off. But if you notice a really big pool, you can just take a dry paper towel like this and just come in here and just touch it, and it will soak up so you don't have these massive pools of paint at the edge of your cardstock. Now there are 2 different ways. You can wait to let this dry, or you can speed it along with a heat tool. And I have to tell you, most of the time I go for that option because I am a very much an instant type of stamper. I like to have my results right now. But in this particular case, especially with the Emboss Resist, I have found that waiting really does pay off. So I'm going to set this aside to dry, and I'm going to show you one that I have already. So I've got one here that's dry, and I went ahead and trimmed the edges 1/4 inch on each side. Something that I like to do, sometimes the paint dries on top of the image, so you don't see as crisp of an embossed image as before. So just take a paper towel and you just mist it lightly. You don't want too much water because you don't want to bring up too much water from the card, but just enough to kind of grab the color on top of the embossed image. It really makes a nice, clean, crisp image. The next step, I'm going to add a little bit more texture to my card. I'm going to pick up with my paintbrush just some water, and I'm going to sprinkle that on. This just gives it a nice subtle texture and actually helps blend. You don't see some of those blend lines as much either. The next thing that I'm going to do is take some white acrylic paint. I just have some on a little card here. I'm going to pick some with my brush. I'm going to make sure my brush is wet. So it's almost going to, just that wet brush is going to water down the paint just a little bit. And I'm going to sprinkle on, splatter on some white paint. And we'll set that aside to dry. The last step is to turn this into a card. And to do that, I die cut one of the frames from the Keep It Simple frame die set, white, and I embossed one of the sentiments from the new pen and ink stamp set. You guys, I love this stamp set. It has the best handwritten fonts and sentiments for really any occasion that you can think of. I used the You Are My Biggest Blessings sentiment, embossed that, put a little bit of Raspberry Fizz grosgrain ribbon on, and rounded the corners. And there you have it, the finished card. Okay, we're going to get started on our second card. Just like the first, I've adhered my watercolor paper to my board. I've got my watercolor and my clean water and my rinsing water. Now I'm going to start with a flat brush, just like I did in the first one, but instead of adding water to the whole card, I'm only going to lay down the water where I want my paint. And in this instance, we're going to leave quite a bit of white space. I'm going to start with some blues. We're going to do some blues and greens this time. A little bit of teal. Sometimes it gets a little concentrated. You can usually pick some of that up with your brush. I'm not worrying about mixing my colors too much right now. I'm going to come in with a little bit of clean water and I'm going to have them blend a little bit. The thing about this is it's different every single time you do it. It's so fun. You never know what you're going to end up with. Now I see a little bit of pooling on this side, so I'm going to use my dry paper towel and I'm going to just pick up some of that. Get a little bit of softer edge there. Now, we set our first project aside to dry the first time, but I did mention that I'm very much an instant gratification type of stamper. So I'm going to use my heat tool to dry this one. But as I do it, I'm going to tilt my board so it runs in different directions so you don't have pools in just one area of your card. This actually helps it blend really nicely too. Watercolor is dry, and for the next step I'm going to splatter on some white paint, much like I did with the first one. A little bit of a damp brush, pick up some paint. And next, I think I want to add a little bit even more texture. So I'm going to pick up some teal paint and just really localize, try to keep it right over the area where my paint is. So I'm going to use my heat tool and dry this real quick. Okay, there we have the finished background. We're ready to assemble it into a card. To do this, I trimmed each side 1/4 inch, and I used the die, this little banner die from the Tag Sale Quilted. I love this thing. I use this all the time. I love the detail of the stitching, and it's the perfect size for so many sentiments. And I embossed one of the sentiments from the Ways to Say Birthday on it, and I stamped and die cut a few of the Grand's Garden flowers. Love this set. You guys, it's so easy to line these up, and it's the bold color, the bold stamps allow you to get really great pops of color, which is perfect for this kind of card. I hope you've enjoyed this week's Make It Monday tutorial. If you would like to play along, head on over to Nicole Hetty's blog, where you can add a link to your project so we can all see your beautiful creation. I can't wait to see what you create. Thanks so much for watching. This has been Laurie Schmidlin for Make It Monday.